Those who know the right questions must reach those asking the wrong ones, and sometimes even the lost. I protect my identity because truth has a body count. Welcome to the Anarchist File. He didn't tell anyone. He just stopped showing up. No breakdown, no long texts, no warning signs with sad violin music playing in the background. He ghosted the group chat, stopped replying to his mom's calls, missed rent twice. Then one day, his landlord opened the door to find a room full of unpaid bills, pre-workout tubs, and silence. Nothing dramatic. Just the quiet kind of self-destruction that men excel at when no one else watching and no one else asking. But here's the wild part. He didn't look sick. He had abs. He lifted 5 times a week. He was the tough it out type. Never talked about feelings. Just trained, worked, flirted, memed his friends. He was stoic, disciplined, cool to himself. He was disappearing in plain sight. That's the problem with male pen. It doesn't look the way they say it should. There's no crying on camera, no diary entries, no drama. It's silent, and it's everywhere. Statistically, men account for nearly 80% of suicides. That's not a mental health stat. That's a cultural indictment. Because we raised a generation of men to die quietly, to struggle like it's a virtue, to break in private while pretending to thrive in public. And then we blame them for not speaking up. We told them real men don't cry. Then we told them, no, wait, actually, vulnerability is strength. Then we laughed when they opened up, called them weird, called them broken, said they were trying too hard, said they were emotionally unstable. And when they bottled it back up again, we called that toxic. You can't win that game. Because male pain isn't treated as a wound. It's treated as a punchline. If a woman tweets she's depressed, she gets empathy, advice, serotonin hacks. If a man tweets it, he gets ratioed, or worse, he gets ignored. The world is not built to hear male struggle. It's built to feed off male silence. And that's why stoicism, true stoicism, not the cartoon version, is having a renaissance, because it doesn't beg, it doesn't perform, it doesn't tweet, it's breakdown in lowercase, it just endures, silently, with structure, with rules. But that's also why it's dangerous, because men are turning back to stoicism not as a life philosophy, but as a coping mechanism. Not because they want to be better, but because they're tired of being punished for being honest. And in that shift from vulnerability to voluntary silence, we are losing something essential. Not emotion, not expression, but connection. A man without an outlet is a bomb with a long fuse. He might look fine, he might even be elite, but inside, it's war. And if no one teaches him how to process it without shame, without weakness, without theatrics, he'll self-destruct, slowly, efficiently, like all men are trained to do. The system is rigged, not just against men, but inside them. In this essay, this isn't a plea for more therapy. This isn't a PSA about checking in with your brothers. This is an unfiltered look at why so many men are losing to their own biology, their own conditioning, and their own beliefs. It's not because they're too stoic. It's because they're taught that every other option makes them less of a man. And in that equation, silence wins. But silence kills. We'll look at the narratives, the lies, the contradictions, the cult of therapy, the religion of ruggedness, and the fine line between being emotionally resilient and emotionally repressed. Because right now, you've got 17-year-olds quoting Marcus Aurelius like it's gospel. You've got 30-year-olds drinking mushroom tea on rooftops because their therapist told them to connect with their inner boy. And in between, a generation of young men with no map, no rite of passage, no way to know if they're healing or hiding. They're trying both, and getting judged either way. Open up. You're weak. Stay stoic. You're cold. Cry. You're cringe. No mouth. You're toxic. So what's left? Performance, pretending, the mask, and eventually, collapse. This isn't theoretical. This is real. This is every guy you know who stopped trying, who can't date, who can't grind, who can't wake up with purpose, who numbs the pain with video games, soft drinks, cheap dopamine, and silence. He's not lazy. He's not lost. He's misled. He was told not to feel. Then he was told to overshare. He tried both. Neither worked. And that's the soul of the problem. Nobody teaches men how to suffer well, to suffer honorably. Not in a depressive spiral, but with structure, with strength, with the ability to hold the pain without turning it into poison. That's what stoicism was meant to be. Not silence, not emotional suicide, but emotional sovereignty. Somewhere along the way, we lost that. And now, we're paying the price. Therapy was supposed to fix everything. That was the promise. The cure for burnout, the antidote to loneliness, the new religion for people who didn't believe in anything else. Talk it out, they said. Feel your feelings. Go to therapy. And for a while, men tried. They booked sessions, they learned the words, boundaries, triggers, trauma. They got fluent in vulnerability. They learned to describe their pain like consultants analyzing quarterly losses. but something felt off. It's not that therapy doesn't work. It's that it works too well for the wrong people. It gives men the language of healing without the structure to live it. It tells them to let go, but never tells them what to hold on to. It helps them understand their sadness, but not transmute it. You can't talk your way out of existential emptiness. You have to build your way out. That's why Stoicism hits different, because it doesn't ask you to dissect the wound. It asks you to walk on it until it hardens into callus. It doesn't romanticize pain. It industrializes it, turns it into something you can use. But here's the paradox. Both therapy and Stoicism are half-truths. One teaches you to feel without function. The other teaches you to function without feeling. The balance between them. That's where most men drown. The therapist says, sit with your emotions. The Stoic says, conquer them. Both are right. Both are wrong. The real answer is to master them. To treat emotions like tools, not tyrants. You don't run from them. You don't worship them. You wield them. But modern men weren't given that manual. They were given TikToks, therapy influencers selling 10-second salvation, Stoic memes, dressed up as discipline porn, Marcus Aurelius quotes posted between selfies and supplements. Everyone's preaching coping mechanisms. Nobody's teaching composure. And the result? A generation of men fluent in self-help, drowning in self-doubt. They can quote Nietzsche, recite Seneca, and still fall apart when their girlfriend ghosts them. They know how to self-regulate but not how to lead. They can talk about shadow work, but can't make rent. They've intellectualized masculinity into impotence. Because therapy and Stoicism both assume you already have a foundation to rebuild on. They assume you've been taught discipline, order, purpose. Most men haven't. They were raised on chaos. Fatherless homes, feminized education systems. Every instinct they have has been labeled dangerous. Every urge towards control, aggression, direction suppressed. So they try to heal in a vacuum. No role models, no mission, just emotions and algorithms. They talk about boundaries to women who don't respect them, and self-care to bosses who will fire them anyway. They treat healing like homework, and when it doesn't work, they think they failed. They didn't fail. They were set up, because therapy is built for comfort. Stoicism is built for war. And most men live somewhere in between, a peace that feels like suffocation, a war they're not allowed to fight, and it's driving them insane. You can see it in their eyes, the overbeaten, the performance, the quiet panic of men trying to be perfect in a world that profits off their exhaustion. They're told to relax while being punished for slowing down. They're retold to be vulnerable in a culture that mocks vulnerability the second it's inconvenient. So they go silent again, not because they're emotionless, but because they've learned that emotion is ammo. Every time they open up, it's used against them. Girlfriends screenshot their pain, friends gossip, employers note it down, and society says, we want men to talk about their feelings. But what it really means is, we want men to talk about their feelings in a way that doesn't make us uncomfortable. That's not healing, that's theater, and men know it. That's why they've built their own language, their own sanctuaries, the gym, the garage, the silence of the drive home, the pre-dawn hours where no one's watching. That's their therapy. Ire and solitude, because in those places, there's no judgment, just gravity, resistance, feedback. You live something heavy enough times, and it becomes a metaphor for everything else. For grief, for pressure, for failure, for survival. The barbell doesn't care about your excuses. It only cares if you show up. And when you do, it gives you something no therapist ever could. Proof. That's why men love discipline. It's the only thing that tells the truth. No filters. No platitudes. Just cause and effect. You do the work, you get the result. But here's the catch. Discipline without direction is just another drug. Some men lift, grind, fast, meditate not to grow, but to avoid. They hide behind routines so rigid they start to look holy. They become monks of suppression, priests of pain. They call it focus, but it's flight. The real test isn't how much you can endure. It's whether you can endure without losing empathy. Whether you can stay strong without going numb. Whether you can be stoic and still human. Because strength without compassion isn't masculinity. It's armor with no man inside it. And therapy without discipline isn't healing, it's indulgence with better branding. The answer is both. But no one teaches both, because both don't sell. Therapy sells hope. Stoicism sells control. The truth sells nothing, it just demands action. And that's the part men are rediscovering. Quietly, alone, without applause, without posts. They're realizing the only cure for male suffering, ISNT talking about ITT's mastering it. Not suppressing it, not drowning it, mastering it. By becoming the kind of man who can carry it all and still walk forward. The silence always starts as strength. That's what no one tells you. It doesn't start as fear or numbness or emptiness. It starts as control. A man gets tired of explaining himself to people who will never understand, so he stops. He cuts out the noise. He stacks routines like sandbags against the flood, and for a while, it works. He becomes efficient, sharp, focused, emotionally untouchable. People even praise it. You're so composed, you're so disciplined, nothing rattles you. They call him stoic like it's a compliment. But what they don't see is that stoicism misuse can become the perfect disguise for decay. Because suppression feels like mastery until the pressure builds. Until the day the armor doesn't open, even when you want it to. Until the silence stops being strength and starts being distance. Until the people you love start feeling like strangers because you can't translate yourself anymore. That's the dark side of stoicism. The mask doesn't come off easy. It's not just a mindset, it's a mechanism. It rewires you to absorb everything and express nothing. Pain becomes data. Betrayal becomes lesson. Fear becomes fuel. You tell yourself that's growth, that's wisdom, that's control. But really, it's isolation disguised as resilience. It's emotion turned into currency you'll never spend. Because you start to notice something. The world doesn't reward men who feel. It rewards men who function. No one asks how you're doing as long as you're producing. No one cares what's killing you as long as you deliver. And somewhere in the grind, you start believing that productivity equals worth. And that's when stoicism stops saving you and starts sedating you. Men love the philosophy because it promises immunity from chaos, from heartbreak, from the constant emotional volatility of modern life. The idea that you can armor up and walk through fire, untouched, it's intoxicating. But it's also a lie, because no matter how much you suppress, you can't cheat nature. Emotions don't vanish, they compound. They turn inward. They become back pain, insomnia, road rage, burnout. They rot your patience, your empathy, your ability to connect. You don't notice it happening. You just wake up one day and realize the part of you that used to care has calcified. You've mastered control, but lost connection. And here's the twisted irony. That's exactly what the system wants. Numb, compliant men. Men who confuse discipline with detachment. Men who won't rebel because they're too busy regulating their cortisol. Because the truly dangerous man, the one the system fears, isn't emotionless. He's integrated. He feels everything but controls the response. He's not reactive, but he's not numb either. His composure is earned, not inherited. That's the difference between a stoic and a sociopath. The stoic still cares, he just chooses his battles. That's what men have to relearn. Stoicism was never meant to erase emotion. It was meant to train it, to focus it, to make sure the pain serves you, not consumes you. The old philosophers knew that. Marcus Aurelius didn't write Meditations to flex discipline. He wrote it to survive despair. But modern stoicism got corrupted by hustle culture. By fake gurus selling you cold showers and caffeine, as if enlightenment came in pre-workout form. They tell you to man up, to grind, to detach. But they don't tell you why. They don't tell you what to build once you've burned the bridges behind you. That's why so many men are strong but aimless. They've mastered restraint but lost direction. They know how to endure, but not how to expand. They can survive anything except their own emptiness. Because purpose is oxygen, and if you don't have it, discipline just becomes slow suffocation. That's why some of the most stoic men you know are the ones closest to breaking. The gym bros, the crypto traders, the lone wolves with perfect posture and dead eyes. They don't need therapy. They need mission. They need meaning. Deeper than optimization, they need a fight worthy of their suffering. Because that's the masculine tragedy. Most men aren't scared of dying. They're scared of living lives that don't matter. The answer isn't to open up and cry about it. It's to channel it, to weaponize it, to build something from it, to transmute the chaos into craft. You don't need to spill your pain across a podcast. You need to turn it into output, into discipline with a destination. That's what real stoicism looks like. Not cold detachment, but calculated endurance. Emotion under command. That S, the kind of strength people feel when you walk into a room and say nothing, but everyone straightens up anyway. Because real composure doesn't come from avoiding pain. It comes from mastering it. That's what no one teaches anymore. How to carry suffering like currency. How to feel everything but fold for nothing. How to endure without becoming hollow. The modern world produces empty achievers. Men who can conquer everything except themselves. They think being unbothered is the goal. It's not. Being unshakable is... There's a difference. Unbothered means you stopped caring. Unshakable means you care so deeply that nothing can take it from you. That's the next evolution of stoicism. Not rejection, integration, pain, patience, passional, in one frame. Controlled, directed, lived with purpose. Because the truth is, men don't need therapy to talk about their feelings. They need philosophy that gives those feelings purpose. They don't need platitudes about self-care. They need the structure to carry suffering without letting it define them. The strong men of tomorrow won't be the ones who feel nothing. They'll be the ones who've learned to feel and still execute. That's the highest form of masculinity. Discipline with soul. Strength with empathy. Fire without smoke. The biggest lie they ever sold men is that strength is oppressive. That confidence is arrogance. That stoicism is so... Because the truth is, when men are strong, systems weaken. When men are clear, industries collapse. When men are disciplined, manipulation fails. Every scam, every ideology, every institution that feeds off confusion needs one thing to survive: emotional volatility. That's why they attack stoicism, not because it's outdated but because it's effective. A man who controls his reactions is immune to propaganda. You can't sell panic to a stoic. You can't sell dependency to a disciplined man. You can't guilt trip someone who's already built his own moral code. And you can de-enslave a man who has learned how to carry his suffering without asking for permission. That's what composure really is: a form of rebellion. The ability to maintain clarity in a culture addicted to outrage, to stand still while everyone else runs in circles. That's why the calm man looks powerful, because he is. But power scares people now, especially male power. Not violence, not domination, but internal power. The kind that radiates through silence. The kind that doesn't need validation. The kind that can't be canceled. That's the most subversive thing a man can be today: calm, competent, and uncaptured. Because when a man stops reacting, the world loses leverage. Every modern industry, from media to politics to consumer therapy, runs on keeping men reactive. They sell problems to provoke emotions, then sell solutions to those same emotions. Fear is profitable, shame is scalable. Insecurity has a subscription model, so the system doesn't actually want men healed. It wants them dependent, just functional enough to work, just broken enough to obey. And what's the best way to make sure of that? Tell men that composure is repression. Tell them calmness is toxicity. Tell them being centered means they're disconnected. Then watch them trade peace for panic. It's genius. Really? Emotional capitalism. They turned male pain into an economy. Every man who buys something to feel enough is a customer of his own confusion. Every man who overshares for digital validation is performing his masculinity for metrics. Every man who tries to be seen instead of being grounded feeds a machine designed to keep him exposed and exhausted. But stoicism flips the script. It removes the middleman. It says, you can keep your noise. I'll manage my soul. And that's why they hate it. Because when men stop seeking comfort, they stop being controlled. When they stop seeking validation, they stop being profitable. When they start leading themselves, they stop needing the system. That's why the modern stoic doesn't fit in. He's not anti-woman, he's not anti-society, he's just anti-dependency. He refuses to be emotionally farmed. He doesn't outsource his happiness to a relationship, his purpose to a company, or his sanity to a therapist who's more lost than he is. He understands what the ancients did. That peace isn't a prize, it's a practice. And that kind of man can't be bought or broken. That's the real revolution, because strength isn't about aggression. It's about composure. It's a restraint to stay stable when everything else collapses. The ability to look chaos in the eye and not blink. The man who can do that, who can stay calm under fire, under pressure, under manipulation, is the last line of civilization. He's the backbone of every functioning household. It's a quiet force behind every thriving family. The one who absorbs storms without passing them down. He doesn't need applause. He just needs order. That's what stoicism is, when done right. Not detachment, but direction. A code for living in a world that's forgotten what codes are, because modern life trains men to chase meaning instead of embodying it. They think fulfillment comes from external victory, money, status, women, followers. But all of that collapses without internal mastery, without command of your own emotions. Success just makes you louder in your misery. So the goal isn't to feel less, it's to feel right, to choose when to feel, how deeply, and what to do with it. That's masculine stoicism, not repression, but regulation. You don't numb yourself to avoid life, you discipline yourself to carry it properly. You don't become unfeeling, you become unfazed. You don't close off, you contain. Because feelings aren't weakness, indulgence is. And if you can hold your emotions without letting them hold you, you become untouchable. That's the kind of man every institution fears. The man who's calm in a crisis, rational in chaos, grounded in temptation, because that man doesn't need saving. He doesn't riot when they tell him to. He doesn't panic when they want him to. He doesn't buy things he doesn't need to fill voids they created. He doesn't fall for psychological warfare disguised as compassion. He just keeps building, quietly, intentionally, efficiently, and in doing so, he reminds everyone else, especially other men, what real control looks like. It's not loud, it's not reactive, it's not performance, stillness, strength under control, emotion under command. That's why the future belongs to the composed, not the loud, not the hysterical, not the eternally processing, but the ones who've turned pain into clarity and emotion into strategy. They'll be the men who raise stable families, run functional businesses, lead disciplined lives. Not because they're perfect, but because they stopped being controlled by chaos. That's the real masculine renaissance, not hypermasculinity, not apathy, but balance, with backbone, compassion with command. And the reason it feels revolutionary is because it is. Because in a culture built on distraction, focus is rebellion. In a culture built on feelings, restraint is power. In a culture built on noise, silence is divine. And that's what Stoicism is becoming again, a form of divinity. Not religious, but spiritual. The worship of order, the reverence for control, the holiness of composure in a world that profits from collapse. That's the paradox of being a man today. The calmer you are, the more dangerous you become. It always comes back to one thing: control. Not control of others, control of self. That's the highest status there is, the one power no government, no therapist, no algorithm can take from you. When you master that, the world stops being something that happens to you and starts being something you navigate. That's the endgame of Stoicism, not detachment, but dominion, over impulse, over vice, over the little internal riots that make most men slaves to emotion. Because when a man loses control, he becomes currency. Someone else profits from his chaos. Someone else writes his story. The modern world thrives on men who can't sit still, who chase dopamine like dogs chasing cars. Men who scroll, drink, overshare, and call it coping. They don't need chains anymore. They've got distractions. The leash is invisible, but it's tight. And that's why composure is the new counterculture. Calm is rebellion. Focus is heresy. A man who can go an hour without his phone, a day without outrage, a week without validation, he's free. And they can't sell freedom. They can only sell dependency. That's why they call discipline toxic. They call composure cold. They call traditional masculinity oppressive. Because it doesn't feed the machine. It feeds families. It builds nations. It restores order. And order is the one thing chaos can't monetize. So the war on masculinity was never about equality. It was about destabilization. Turn men emotional enough to be manipulated, insecure enough to be marketed to, and ashamed enough to never fight back. Replace mentorship with algorithms, fathers with influencers, discipline with medication, and you've created a generation of predictable consumers. But that cycle ends with men who remember, men who wake up before the noise, who train not for vanity but for virtue, who study philosophy before they scroll, who work in silence and build legacies out of focus, who feel deeply but never broadcast weakness as currency. Those men are coming back, quietly, in garages, in home gyms, in side hustles, and notebooks, in small acts of defiance that look boring to everyone else but mean everything to them. The return of the Stoic isn't about pretending emotion doesn't exist. It's about proving you can handle it better than anyone else. It's about walking into a chaotic world and remaining composed not because you're numb, but because you're sovereign. That's what separates strength from fragility. Fragile men react. Strong men respond. Fragile men need constant affirmation. Strong men build their own certainty. Fragile men outsource meaning. Strong men create it. You don't need the world to understand you. You need to understand yourself. Because the world doesn't reward emotion, it rewards results. It doesn't pay empathy, it pays execution. And that's not cruel. That's reality. The beauty of Stoicism is that it doesn't promise comfort. It promises clarity. It says, you are responsible for everything you can control and nothing else. That's freedom disguised as burden. Once you accept it, life gets simpler. Not easier, simpler. The gym, the grind, the quiet work, they're not escapes. They're prayers. Discipline is devotion. Restraint is worship. Every rep, every routine, every moment you choose principle over pleasure is an act of resistance against the noise. You can't heal in the same culture that profits from your wounds. You have to step out. Build your own temple, your own structure, your own mind. That's the final lesson. Stoicism isn't about rejecting emotion, it's about rejecting dependency. It's about saying, I can handle what I feel, and I don't need permission to do it. Because the second you can control yourself, you stop being controllable. And when enough men do, when enough fathers lead that way, enough sons grow up that way, enough leaders operate that way, the whole system tilts. The fake collapses. The chaos loses its edge. That's why they call calm men dangerous. Because when men stop reacting, the world has to face itself. So don't chase peace like it's somewhere else. Build it where you stand. Master your body, master your craft, master your mind. Speak less, execute more. Feel everything. Show nothing unnecessary. Lead quietly. Live deliberately. Because the truth is, the world doesn't need more expressive men. It needs more composed ones. Men who bring order to chaos. Men who can suffer without resentment. Men who can lead without ego. Men who can love without losing discipline. That's what masculinity was always meant to be. Not the absence of emotion, but the architecture that contains it. And that's why Stoicism matters again. Because it's not a philosophy. It's a blueprint. A manual for surviving an empire built on distraction. A reminder that every empire falls, but every man still has his own kingdom. The space between impulse and action. Rule that kingdom, and you've already won. Because no matter how loud the world gets, no one can touch the man who governs himself. The story isn't over. This was the anarchist file.